Hello and welcome to David's Politics Show. A year on from the tragic and fateful events of October 7, and in the wake of the most recent extension of the ensuing conflict to the northern front in Lebanon, Israel seems to have turned the tables on its enemies. Hamas's forces have been either wiped out or rendered combat ineffective. Hezbollah's command and control structure has been decapitated, and Iran's ballistic missile barrage seems not to have caused significant damage. So, is Israel winning? Is that the right way to evaluate the current balance of forces in the region? And what does winning in this troubled and conflict-ridden region even mean? With me to discuss all this and more is Dr. Ahron Bregman, Senior Teaching Fellow in the Department of War Studies at King's College London, and a previous guest on this podcast. Ahron, it's a pleasure to have you back on the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me, David. Hi there.
So, Ahron, we talked, as we were saying just before we started the recording, we talked almost exactly a year ago, and a lot has changed, but in certain other respects, a lot has stayed the same. I want to begin with Gaza. That's where it all started. Almost exactly a year ago. We're recording on October 6th today. Gaza has been turned into what one can, I think, relatively objectively call an apocalyptic wasteland. It gives new meaning to the phrase "to lay waste to something." The IDF itself says that they've essentially destroyed, I think it was 23 of the 24 battalions, whatever the number is, a significant chunk of what used to be Hamas's combat forces. Some important individuals have also been taken out. Some of the commanders, Mohammed Deif. Of course, the big kahuna, so to speak, Sinwar, is presumably still alive, although it's hard to know. I mean, we haven't heard from him in a long time, and he's very likely surrounded by some of the remaining hostages. So, if we kind of look at the big picture here and take stock of everything I've just mentioned, what is your sense of how we should interpret these military achievements? Is this a victory of some sort, or is it better understood as just a series of tactical successes?
What we have to do is to ask ourselves, what is it that the Israelis wanted to achieve in Gaza? And what the government wanted to achieve was basically two things. Number one was to topple Hamas. These are the words used by the government. Aim number two was to bring the hostages back home. Mm-hmm. There was another hidden objective. I'll come to it later. Now let us look at the two objectives and whether it was achieved. Toppling Hamas? No. Hamas is battered. Hamas is bleeding. Most of it is destroyed, but Hamas is still standing. Mm-hmm. And when this war is over, there will be Hamas in the Gaza Strip, because you cannot destroy Hamas, which is an idea. Right. Hamas is more than mortars and Kalashnikovs and hand grenades. Hamas is an idea. You cannot destroy ideas with bombs, not even with 1-ton bombs which you drop from the air. So this objective was not achieved. Objective number two, to return the Israeli hostages. We have to remember that Hamas managed to take with them more than 200 hostages. Now, some of the hostages were released in military operations and diplomatic deal, but most of them were killed in Gaza, mainly by Israeli fire. Israel, history will show us that Israel killed most of its hostages, or I will put it differently. Most of the hostages were killed in Gaza, were killed either by Israeli fire or they were killed by the Hamas guards when Israel or Israeli troops got too close to them. And at the moment, there are more than 100 hostages, according to the Israelis in Gaza. I believe that half of them are dead. And therefore, these two declared objectives were not achieved. The only thing that the Israeli achieved in Gaza is the one undeclared objective, which was revenge. Revenge was achieved. More than 60% of the buildings in Gaza are in rubble. I believe that by the end of this war in Gaza, there will be more than 60,000 dead Palestinians. And therefore, this is the picture. If you ask me to give it a grade, to grade it anything between 1 and 10, I would probably give it 4 out of 10.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. I mean, just because you mentioned the casualties on the Palestinian side, the other thing that strains belief is where the survivors are, where and how they are living, right? I mean, it's incredible. These millions of people, they're not in their homes because most of them have been destroyed. A lot of them are on the beaches somewhere. You know, it's incredible that they managed to not starve, although there was that, there was fear that at some point that might happen. The same thing with polio, etc. And on the remaining hostages, in a curious paradoxical sense, they are all, those ones that are still alive, they're probably around Sinwar all the time, so they're kind of dead, dead at the same time. They're kind of in this limbo zone, right? Because if he goes down, they will go down with him.
Yes, I think that the Israeli fear is that if they try to get Sinwar, they might kill hostages who might be around him. We believe that Sinwar is still alive. But look, even if the Israelis kill him, the picture will remain the same. A replacement will be found, and Hamas will continue to be there in Gaza, and it is likely that it will rebuild itself. You see, I gave the Gaza front 4 out of 10, but the 4 is given to the military, not to the political level in Israel, because you see, the Israeli politicians or the Israeli government or the Netanyahu government, they failed to take what the military has done in Gaza and turn it into something which is bigger. You see, war, killing, destroying is not the purpose. The purpose is to turn a military 4 out of 10, relative, some success, to turn it into something which is bigger. And as long as the Israelis or Netanyahu government, as long as they don't offer a replacement to Hamas or a better idea than Hamas, there's not going to be victory. There's not going to be success, because military is not the purpose. Destruction is not the purpose. Killing Sinwar is not the purpose.
Right. It's not an end in itself, right? That's the thing. I mean, at the end of the day, all these people in Gaza are still there. That's why Sinwar, in a certain sense, I'm curious what you think about this. In a certain sense, it seems to me that no matter what happens to him, and no matter what has happened to all these people in Gaza who've been killed and the hostages, in a certain basic sense, Sinwar already won, because what he wanted to do was to turn the issue no longer into one of 67, where exactly is the border and all of that. He wanted to turn it back into the question of 48. Who gets to decide, who is the sovereign in this land? Us or them? And the problem Israel still has is that, you can kill him, you can kill 23 out of the 24 battalions, whatever. At the end of the day, all these people are still there. What are you going to do with them?
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I might have already mentioned it in our previous conversation. I can't remember, but because I talked to you, David, when it all started,
Hmm.
and maybe I'm repeating myself now in saying that in Palestinian history, Sinwar will be regarded as a hero.
Yes, you mentioned that last time, yeah. More than Arafat, perhaps.
Oh yes, exactly. I saw, yeah, and he will be remembered as a hero for them. Not now, because there's a lot of distraction in
Yeah,
Gaza and people
yeah.
are angry, and I'm sure that many people are upset with him. But look into the future in 20 or 30 years' time, in Palestinian books, Sinwar will be regarded as the one who really challenged Israel.
Hmm.
And also, it might be that what will happen in the near medium future is a regional war. This has always been the dream of Sinwar, that it will not be only an attack coming from Gaza, but also that Iran will become involved, Hezbollah, Lebanon, etc. And it might be that we will see it in the future. And therefore, I agree with you. It doesn't matter if Sinwar is alive or not. He managed to achieve for the Palestinians something that very few Palestinian leaders managed to achieve for them, which is to put the Palestinian issue back at the center of discussions.
Right.
Just before the 7th of October attack on Israel, 7th of October 2023, it seemed as if the Palestinian issue or problem, as it is called, is forgotten. Because everyone talked about peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia and changes in the Middle East. And the Palestinian issue was pushed to the end of the list.
Hmm.
All of a sudden, it is in the discussion, the heart of the discussion. In Saudi Arabia, listening to the leaders saying, well, in the future, there will not be peace between the Palestinians. All of a sudden, it's back on the agenda. As from this point of view, Sinwar succeeded.
Yeah, yeah. He gave the lie to the Netanyahu idea, precisely as you said, that the Palestinian problem you can just put it in a box to one side, and there are more pressing issues. The Middle East is not really fundamentally about that, and so on and so forth. Yeah. Let me turn now a little bit to what's going on in the north, because this has really taken a different turn over the last month or so. When Israel, somewhat unexpectedly, I mean, I have to say, I didn't expect they would do the things they have done, decided to really ramp it up and actually take on Hezbollah. They obviously took out Nasrallah himself. That was a pretty big event, and together with him, a good chunk of Hezbollah's senior leadership, a lot of their senior commanders. There were a lot of impressive kind of intelligence type operations with the pagers and the walkie talkies, etc. And according to what I've read in the papers, the IDF has been going into Lebanon with special forces for the better part of 6 months now. Doing reconnaissance, taking out tunnels, and so on and so forth. But here too, I want to ask you, how do you see, what do you think is the end game there too? Because Israel has been in Lebanon before, right? Nobody knows that better than you. You were there in the 80s, when the problem was the PLO, which had a kind of army-like structure in a certain sense too. And in fact, Hezbollah was born out of the ashes of that of the PLO's defeat in the 1980s. So it seems to me that there too, there's a kind of the more things change, the more they stay the same kind of dynamic, where every 40, 50 years or so we watch the same movie all over again. So, how do you interpret what Israel is, first of all, what Israel's objectives are in Lebanon? How far do you think they'll go into Lebanon, for how long? And, can this have a fundamentally strategic effect, or are we dealing once again with just kind of mopping things up and not really changing anything?
Let's give it some context and do exactly what we've done with Gaza. What was the Israeli objective? When Hamas attacked Israel on the 7th of October, Hezbollah, which was then led by Hassan Nasrallah, who is now dead, decided to open fire at Israel, to fire rockets, etc. And Hezbollah said, we will fire at you Israelis as long as you fire at Gaza. Mm-hmm. In other words, Nasrallah linked the two fronts. He said to the Israelis, you stop there, I'll stop here. He linked the two fronts. And he kept fire into Israel. And he fired so much, especially the Israeli villages, which are on the border, very close to Lebanon. Mm-hmm. Hezbollah could look from their side of the border into the living room of Israelis. It is so close. It is physically on the border, on the blue line, on the so-called blue line. And therefore, the Israeli government decided to evacuate all the Israelis who live there. We are talking about 60,000 people who are still, for 11 months now, nearly a year now, living in hotels in central Israel. Yeah. They are not in their villages now. And therefore, the government decided to shift to Lebanon. The center of gravity, David, moved from Gaza to Lebanon, from the south to the north. And the government said to the military, this is what you have to do. You have to create the conditions which will enable the Israeli citizens to return to their villages. That's the official declared objective, and this is what the military is trying to do now. The government wanted to create a condition to allow them to return safely. That's the key word, safely, to their villages. Now, what makes it not safe? What makes it not safe is the fact that, first of all, there are Hezbollah forces along the border, the so-called Radwan force, the elite force of Hezbollah. Very few of them are along the borders now, very few of them, because the Israelis bombed them and they just left. But Hezbollah, over the years, the last 20 years, built infrastructure along the border. And it is very interesting why they built it. They built, for example, short tunnels to store weapons. They built communication centers very close to the border. And it might surprise you, David, why they built it. Because, Hezbollah plan was, and they were very open about it, was to cross into Israel, to enter Israeli villages, to kill people, to take prisoners, to go back to Lebanon. Yeah. This is exactly what Hamas did on the 7th of October. In fact, and that's the interesting thing, Hamas stole
Hezbollah's
idea and executed in the south. The 7th of October 2023, the Hamas 7th of October 2023 attack is Hezbollah idea. Now, back to Hezbollah. They build the infrastructure along the border in order so that when do cross the border, they have all these weapons very close to the border, these, stores of weapons, etc. So the Israeli forces are there in the north, and they're trying to clear all these infrastructure, to blow it up, to block it with cement, and doing such things. But with the Israelis, there is always a non-declared objective. Just like in Gaza, the non-declared one in Gaza was revenge. And there is also a non-declared objective in Lebanon, which is to hit Hezbollah very hard, to destroy its weapons, to kill its people, so that one day, when the diplomats become involved, because all wars end with a diplomatic settlement, and this one will also end with a diplomatic settlement. So the Israelis want to create a situation whereby in the future, when they will have to negotiate the future of Hezbollah in Lebanon and what to do, this and that, Hezbollah will be weak. That's what they want to do. So this is the undeclared objective, and that's why they are bombing in the Tahia, which is in South Beirut. And I believe that what we'll see in the coming weeks is Israeli forces not only operating along the border, but moving a little bit deeper into Lebanon. The Israelis say, oh, this is not our objective, but I don't believe them. I'm very bold about it, because for me, it doesn't matter what the Israelis say. I look at the number of forces on the ground, and the Israelis assembled 2 divisions, at least 2 divisions. That's a huge force. They don't need this force in order to clear the infrastructure along the border. Right. They have something else that they want to do. That's why they assembled so many forces.
Yeah, it's interesting. I noticed you posted that on Twitter. You know, the fact that they assembled 2 divisions, which is a lot. And yeah, it seems as though, you know, maybe one of the longer term objectives here is to turn all of that area just across the border into basically a no man's land, a kind of buffer zone where no one will be able to return, because otherwise, right, this was the situation before this latest attack. Israel had been basically strategically shrunk, right, into from the north and the south. And in fact, you know, if we think now to the status quo ante before October 7th last year, it's incredible that people lived so close to the border, right, both in the north and the south.
Yeah, and you know, David, between 1985 and 2000, the wars between Lebanon and Israel, there was a buffer zone created by the Israelis on about 10% of Lebanese territory. It was quite big. This was the buffer zone, and the Israelis might want to have another buffer zone now. They don't. They say that they do not want to have it, but things have the dynamic. And what happened between 1985 and 2000 is that in the buffer zone, there was the buffer zone turned into Israel's Vietnam. It was so bad. And the only reason why the Israelis withdrew from Lebanon in May 2000 was a combination of 2 things, which might become the reasons why the Israelis, if they do get stuck in Lebanon, will be the reasons in the future which will get Israel again out of Lebanon. And these 2 things, which forced Israel out of Lebanon in 2000 and might force them in the future out of Lebanon, well, number one, very effective Hezbollah guerrilla attacks on them, which killed in this period more than 850 young men, Israelis. Mm-hmm. So these attacks on Israel, on these troops, was one reason why Israel withdrew from Lebanon in 2000. The other reason why the Israel withdrew was an anti-war movement in Israel, which was called the Four Mother Movement, led by 4 mothers of soldiers who were killed in Lebanon. And these two things combine to put enough pressure on the government to get out of Lebanon. Now, listen, David, there is a very good chance that the Israelis will get bogged in Lebanon again.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want it. They don't want it. But the war has its own dynamic.
Right.
And what is now planned as a short operation in Lebanon might become operation which takes weeks, months, and then all of a sudden you are stuck for years in Lebanon. That's the danger of the Israelis. That's the trap, to get bogged down there, like the Americans in Vietnam and the Americans in Iraq.
Yeah.
And so on. That's the danger. You get stuck there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially moments like these, right, when there's a certain amount of euphoria because Israel's been so successful with these, the pager attacks, the walkie-talkies, taking out Nasrallah. It seems like they can do anything. But, you've taken out the leadership, certainly. So you've disorganized them, they're disaggregated, etc. But the fighters, most of the fighters are still there, and they still have a ton of weapons. So they can still do a lot of damage.
Yes. Hezbollah is a strong military organization that are well trained. They have weapons. Of course, the Israelis are trying to stop weapons coming from Iran. But you see, unlike Gaza, Hezbollah operates in Lebanon. And Lebanon got airfields, airports, ports, open borders to Syria. So weapon can get in. It's not Gaza where the Israelis could block it. And therefore Hezbollah got the weapons. They are well trained because they fought in Syria for many years. They helped Assad, the leader of Syria, to stay in power when there were strong demonstrations against him. And Hezbollah is very determined. And they don't need, all this high command in order to do guerrilla attacks on Israel. In the first, when Israel invaded last week, on the first or second day, they already lost 8-9 men, and many were injured.
Yeah.
So Israel, when they move into Lebanon, they're already there, they lose most of their advantages. Because when you move on the ground, especially in South Lebanon, because of the geography, I know the place very well, I was there. Because of the geography, it is very difficult, for example, for tanks to maneuver. And therefore, and for airplanes to support you from the air, because of the bushes, because of the trees, because of the geography, because of the weather. Look, don't forget, David, winter is coming to Lebanon. I was there in the winter. When it's raining in Lebanon, it's raining. Torrential rains. And there could be snow in Lebanon. And therefore, with the Israelis moving on the ground, they lose much of their advantage. It is a rifle against rifle. Israel rifle against Hezbollah rifle. Israeli troop against Hezbollah troop. And they don't have the Israelis any advantage. And therefore, it is complicated. And the euphoria in Israel at the moment will go out of the window, David, when the number of troops killed in Lebanon increases. And it's going to increase.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because when the operation in Gaza started, there were, fears that there would be really a lot of casualties, Israeli casualties in the Gaza Strip. In the end, they bombed so much from the air, and they had trained also to do that kind of fighting, that the number of casualties was much lower. But in Lebanon, as you said, the terrain is different. It's a different enemy, different resources, different resupply routes. So yeah, it's certainly going to be a tougher challenge. But one thing that just came to mind about the leadership too, right? Because I noticed you also wrote this. It was either on Twitter or on your Substack that Nasrallah himself became the leader because Israel killed his predecessor, right? And Nasrallah was in a certain sense more charismatic, perhaps more more of a strategic thinker. Certainly not less radical than his predecessor. And in a funny kind of way, the same thing. It's the same with Hamas, because I mean, when Israel took out Haniya in Tehran, Haniya was a peacenik compared to Sinwar.
Yeah, but you see, David, I think that a very important lesson of war regarding assassinations is that it doesn't really matter, in the sense that militarily there are always replacements. Israel withdrew under Ariel Sharon, Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, from the Gaza Strip in August, September 2005. Just before leaving, Sharon instructed the military to assassinate the Hamas leadership. So Israel assassinated someone by the name of Ahmed Yassin, the leader, the founder,
the guy on the
of
wheelchair.
Hamas. Yeah, of course. And then they assassinated his deputy, Rantisi. Rantisi was dressed like a woman sitting in a taxi, and the Israelis assassinated him. And the Israelis assassinated Nasrallah. And the Israelis assassinated all the leadership. It doesn't matter, David. It doesn't matter, because always replacements. And what it does is to increase morale in Israel. All these James Bond operations, the pager operation, where Israel blew up 3,000 beepers, pagers. It did help them, because it injured many. We're talking about 3,000 or 4,000 key operators in Hezbollah. But usually, or overall, it doesn't matter if you assassinate leaders. It just helps for your morale, because everyone in the television studios, wow, we assassinated this or that. Hezbollah can operate without Nasrallah. It is more difficult because, for example, there are big questions which you need the leader to decide. For example, Hezbollah, are we going to bomb Tel Aviv? Are we going to take out a ballistic missile and bomb Tel Aviv? Or are we only to focus on the northern part of Israel? So there are big decisions that you need the leaders to decide. Otherwise, most of the attention is now on Israel. But if you look at Hezbollah, they keep firing on Israel hundreds of rockets on Israel, on Haifa and the areas around Haifa, and they will continue to do that.
Yeah. Let's turn now to Iran. When Israel struck the IRGC building, consulate, whatever one wants to call it, in Syria in April, Iran felt that it had to do something, because it was such an affront to Iranian diplomatic immunity, I guess you could call it. Although, I mean, to speak of diplomatic immunity in Syria is a bit of a joke. But in any event, they had to reply. They did it with the salvo of ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, drones. Some people say it was relatively telegraphed, so that they kind of knew that Israel plus Jordan plus the U.S., etc., would be able to intercept a lot of these munitions, and in fact, most of them were intercepted. This time, they've responded with just ballistic missiles and in somewhat larger numbers, but the results have not been particularly impressive. Some of the missiles did get through, and they have damaged some of the bases. But what is your sense of how Israel and other actors in the region, including Iran's own proxies, are interpreting this response? I mean, for example, are the proxies satisfied with what Iran has done?
You see, again, I'll put it in a little bit of context because I'm a teacher. So I do apologize, David. Iran built around Israel, but I will be short, it's focused.
No, please.
Iran built, over the years, around Israel what they call a circle of fire. Hezbollah was the jewel in the crown in Lebanon, but then then Iran set up Shia groups in Iraq and in Syria and in Yemen, the Houthis, and Hamas, of course. All of them received money and weapons from Iran. The idea was, number one, the main idea was that if Israel attacks the nuclear facilities in Iran give an order to all the proxies to open fire. That was the idea. That's why we have all these proxies in the region. Now, what Israel is doing now, while we are talking, David, what the Israelis are doing there is to destroy this ring of fire. Hezbollah, they killed Nasrallah, they killed the leaders, they destroyed the weapons, they bombed the Israelis in Yemen, they bombed in Iraq, they destroyed Hamas. The Israelis are destroying the ring of fire.
Right. The axis of resistance, right, as they call it.
Exactly, yes, exactly that. And for Iran, I don't envy them. It's a strategic decision that they have to take. What are we going to do?
Yeah.
It's like, David, it's like buying a share. The share collapses, and you have to ask yourself, am I going to invest in the same share? It just collapsed. So Iran must decide what to do next. And one of the things that they do is to fire at Israel, and they are very reluctant to do that. And they fire at Israel for a variety of reasons. Number one, they want to deter Israel, to say to them, stop doing it.
Yeah.
Number two, the Iranian regime is under a criticism by the proxies. You've abandoned us. Mm-hmm. You are part of this axis. You are part of it. Where are you? You should help us. You should help us, Hezbollah, not only with providing weapons, but by opening a new front against Israel. So there's a lot of criticism. Mm-hmm. And Iran feels that it should respond to it. Also, in Iran, there is strong domestic opposition to the regime. Now, if the opposition in Iran thinks that the Iranian regime, is a paper tiger, then they might, embark on big, demonstrations in Tehran.
Right. And I get all sorts of ideas they shouldn't have.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why Iran fired at Israel twice now. And what we are waiting to see now is the Israeli reaction. And David, for the last 3 or 4 days, the days after the Iranian attack on Israel, where they landed on Israel 180 missiles, some of the missiles did get through. Whenever I open my eyes in the morning and I realize that the Israeli airplanes are still parked, I'm taken aback because I expect them to be either on the way to Iran or back from Iran. And I'm saying it because the Israeli practice is that when they are under attack, Israel, they react almost immediately. Mm-hmm. And now they're taking their time. They will hit back. I have no doubt about it. Not that I'm encouraging it. Don't misunderstand me. I'm just surprised as an academic in the sense that Israel always react immediately. What's going on? Why the airplanes are not on the way? That's an interesting question.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it's a slightly ominous sign, right? Maybe it's a sign that they're planning something a lot bigger than what they did last time when they only hit the S-400 site, kind of and a symbolic kind of prick to say, look, we can basically take out your eyes and ears on the ground.
Yeah. Well, I think that there could be a few explanations, maybe tactical reasons. Let the Iranians sweat a little bit. Let's just wait. We
Mm.
waited last time for them.
Yeah.
Wait, let them
Yeah. Yeah.
sweat. Sometimes, the sweating process is as bad as, but I think that, if to be serious now, I think that for the Israelis, it's a big decision.
Mm.
And they are under a massive international pressure, especially American pressure, French pressure, German pressure, not to overdo it.
Mm-hmm.
And the Israelis, although they don't like it, they must listen a little bit to these nations, because when Iran hit back, then Israel will need American support and maybe support of other countries. So they do have to listen to what these nations, these leaders are saying to them. For Biden, good old Joe, it's a nightmare
Yeah.
if it's going to develop into a regional war 1 month before the elections. That's the last thing he needs.
Mm.
Petrol prices could go up, a regional war in the Middle East, maybe attacks on the American soldiers in the Middle East. It's a disaster, could be a disaster for him. And therefore, I believe that there is a lot of pressure on Israel to be careful with what targets they choose.
Mm-hmm.
That's the main point. That's the heart of the matter. And I think that this could be the reason for the delay.
Yeah. It's interesting that you bring up, Biden and the American administration, because I want to kind of tie that into our conversation too. Certainly, it seems as though Netanyahu and in fact, not just Netanyahu, but also his kind of right-wing allies have been really leading Biden and the Americans by the nose this whole time. I mean, the situation has already gotten way out of hand for Biden compared to what the exact temperature that he would have liked things to remain at. Do you think Netanyahu is the way he understands the situation is, look, I have a window of opportunity here until, say, November or the end of the year. After that, certainly in January, no matter what happens, things might get tricky again. So I'm going to make the most of it. I'm going to make the most of the next 2-3 months. Is that, do you think, how he looks at it?
You might be right, David. You are right. Biden is furious with Netanyahu.
Mm.
Furious with Netanyahu because Netanyahu doesn't count him.
Yeah.
You see, Biden said to Netanyahu, do not go to Rafah. Don't occupy Rafah. Netanyahu went there. Biden tried to arrange a ceasefire in Lebanon, a diplomatic solution, which is possible, by the way. It is possible. There is a diplomatic solution. Not easy, but it's possible. So Netanyahu sent his envoy to talk to the people, in Washington to discuss this ceasefire or diplomatic arrangement in Lebanon. And guess what Netanyahu did? He assassinated Nasrallah.
Yeah. In the hotel room, and he took a picture of it too.
Exactly. Exactly. So
Yeah.
Biden is furious with Netanyahu because Netanyahu is doing things. Netanyahu obviously wants to see Trump back in power, and he's doing things that Biden believes are against him or done on purpose. I'm furious with Biden, by the way. Not that I'm important. I'm not Netanyahu, and I'm not important. But I think that Biden, whom I admired, and I was so happy when he came to power, he will go down in history as the one who enabled Israel to turn Gaza into rubble.
No,
By
absolutely.
providing Israel with the sort of weapons which are so powerful that could physically turn Gaza into rubble. He provided, or not him, but the American administration provided Israel with massive bombs, 1,000 kilograms. You know, I was an artillery officer. My bombs, were of 50 kilograms, 50. The bombs Israel dropped on Gaza were of 1,000 kilograms. These are massive bombs. That's why there is so much damage
No.
in Gaza. And it took Biden way too long to say, I stop giving you these weapons now. Israel was very annoyed with Biden that he stopped the shipping of the big bombs. But it took Biden way too long to do that. You provide the weapons to do that. You, Biden, you're part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, the whole spectacle was pretty pathetic, right? I mean, it was this constant charade of Biden and his people saying, "Oh, don't do this," or we'll stop the shipments, and then 2 seconds later, Netanyahu does exactly that, and the shipments continue. But it's a pattern, right? I mean, the same thing happened in Ukraine, right, where it was this constant drip feeding of just enough, and then way too late just to avoid, the embarrassing collapse of the Ukrainian army, but without really punishing Putin for what he did. I'm conscious of time, so I want to kind of tie the ends of the conversation together by reading something from a book I read a couple of years ago. Maybe you know the book. It's Rise and Kill First by the journalist Ahron Bregman. There's a very interesting paragraph right towards the end when he's in the conclusion. He's kind of wrapping things up after having described all these impressive successes by the Mossad and Shin Bet and whatnot. It's a slightly lengthier quote, but I think it's worth reading. He writes the following: throughout their successive histories, the Mossad, Amman, and the Shin Bet provided Israel's leaders sooner or later with operational responses to every focused problem they were asked to solve. But the intelligence community's very success fostered the illusion among most of the nation's leaders that covert operations could be a strategic and not just a tactical tool, that they could be used in place of real diplomacy to end the geographic, ethnic, religious, and national disputes in which Israel is mired. Because of the phenomenal successes of Israel's covert operations, at this stage in its history, the majority of its leaders have elevated and sanctified the tactical method of combating terror and existential threats at the expense of the true vision, statesmanship, and genuine desire to reach a political solution that is necessary for peace to be attained. End quote. And I think that sums up so neatly what you also talked about in our conversation today,
Yeah,
right?
of course, because David, if you look back now, the last year or the last years, you can see that the Israelis are very successful tactically. They the amazing James Bond Beeper operation in Beirut, and the assassinations one after the other.
Right. Hania in his bedroom in Tehran.
Yes, of course, yes. All these assassinations and amazing operations. And the Israelis, what they do, they collect tactical successes. That's what they do. That's what they do. And it's not, you can't win war with tactical successes. You have to have a bigger picture. You have to use it to change the reality in the region, in the Middle East. And therefore, if you do what I do, which is to watch Israeli television, you can see that whenever they have a tactical success, the mood in the studio is one of euphoria, even hubris.
No.
And then a couple of days later, you can see that the mood is grimmer. It's there, you forget about the tactical, success.
Yeah.
And I think that if I just take this and try to look into the future, I think that what's happening now in the Middle East, in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Iran, etc., is something that the Israelis will soon realize that they are involved in, which is a war of attrition. The Israelis are at the moment in a war of attrition on so many fronts.
Mm-hmm.
And the tactical successes will not help them to solve the problem. They have to think out of the box how to turn the tactical successes that they have into something bigger, which will enable them to live with their neighbors in the region. They cannot go like that in a war of attrition forever. The Israelis are not built for that. The economy is not built for them. They don't have enough troops. And therefore, they need these leaders who will be able to look into the future and see how they could, gather all these tactical successes and turn it into something which is bigger. And the bigger thing that they should strive for is having peace with their neighbors, And it is possible. It is possible. They cannot live on the sword forever. They're just too small.
Yeah.
So that's the reality at the moment, David, while we are, talking to each other on this Sunday. There is a war of attrition in the Middle East, and it will go on for some time, and hopefully the Israelis will be able to, to change the dynamic, and turn it all into something which is peace.
Yeah, and one thing that, again, to go back to where we started with Sinwar and what his objective was all along, to bring once again into the forefront the question of to whom does the land belong, right? In a way, maybe one of the, maybe historians in the future will say that, the October 7 attack in 2023 and what happened in the following years was the beginning of a shift also among the Palestinians themselves, that, maybe they begin to say, you know what, Israel, you've won. You've won. We don't want a state anymore. We want to be part of your state, because you dominate us anyway. You are the only state in the region. Okay, then we will come unarmed. Millions of people in Gaza or whatever, just walk to the fence, or just throw down their weapons and say, you know what, you've won. Now either you oppress us for the rest of time, or we want to be a part of you. And that paradoxically, that will be the most potent weapon against the whole Zionist idea that the Palestinians have ever had.
Yes, of course. From an Israeli point of view, the best solution. And look, David, nobody is in the mood now to talk about peace plans, diplomacy, etc.
Right.
There's time for war and there's time for peace. Now, not that I'm happy about it, now it's time of war. Yeah. But somewhere in the future, the Israelis will have to ask themselves, what do we do next as far as the Palestinians are concerned? Because the Palestinian issue, David, is the heart of the matter. Yeah. You cannot deny it. They cannot deny it. If you look at the crisis, the current crisis, you will see that it is all linked. Houthis, Hezbollah, Iran, it is all linked to the Palestinians. Now, let me just say something which I've probably already talked to you about last time, but I'm going to repeat it. The Israelis will have to take in the future, not now again, not now, they're not in the mood for that, a strategic decision. Do we want to separate from the Palestinians, to have a two-state solution or not. In my opinion, the only solution is a two-state solution. And this is for the Israelis. I'm not talking about the Palestinians now. Because you see, David, between the sea and the Jordan River, and I apologize if I've already said it to you, but I'll repeat it. It is so important. Between the sea and the River Jordan, there are 10 million people. Half of them, about 5 million Jews/Israelis. 5 millions Palestinians/Muslims, Christians. If Israel failed to separate from them, then in 10 or 20 years' time, the majority of the people between the sea and the river will be non-Jews. And then the Israelis will have to face the question, are we going to let them vote in general elections? If they do allow them to vote, it will be there will be a Palestinian prime minister.
No.
And if they say, no, we are not going to let them vote, this will be South Africa, apartheid.
No.
So the only solution which will benefit the Israelis is a separation and having their own state, Jewish state, democratic state, on part of the land, which is not the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. But again, as I said, it's time of war now, and nobody will listen to us, David.
Yeah, that's true. That's certainly true. Yeah. Ahron, it's been terrific. Really, really interesting conversation. Before we wrap things up, I want to mention for the listeners a couple of your most recent books: "Cursed Victory: A History of Israel and the Occupied Territories," and most recently, "The Spy Who Fell to Earth: My Relationship with the Secret Agent Who Rocked the Middle East," which is also a Netflix show. And on Twitter, they can find you at Ahron Bregman. And more recently, you've also started a Substack, Ahron Opinion, Israel and Middle Eastern Affairs. So they can find all your most recent writings there. Ahron, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. As always, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much. Thank you.